Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video I'll be talking about this camera right here. It's the Canon EOS R. Now this camera has been out for a while now, I know, but it is still one of my main cameras that I use for both professional work as well as personal work, and in my opinion it is still a very capable camera today. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Canon EOS R, despite its age, I still think that this camera is still very capable for many fields of photography, whether if you're in journalism or weddings or events, things like that. Yes, there are some downsides, but there are also quite a few positive things about this camera as well, and in this video I'll be talking about both pros and cons in terms of usability, ergonomics, operational side of things, image quality, a bit of the video quality as well, and into my conclusion. So on the ergonomics and operational side of things, functionalities, if you're coming down from any other Canon cameras, whether it's, you know, the lower end or the 5D line or the 6D line, what have you, you'll feel very at home with this camera. And pretty much when I first came from my 5D line of cameras, I still use them, by the way, it really feels like another Canon camera. It really does. It's not much that has changed apart from certain buttons that they redesigned and things like that, just to accommodate the new body design, things like that. So yeah, it's really familiar, and you can really learn through your menu. It's usually very quickly to learn through the menu, and usually Canon menus don't really require a lot of time to learn anyway, and it just makes the camera a little bit more efficient to use. The ports are really nicely sealed and you can just access them really quickly, and it's not really flimsy like some other cameras, even from Canon. So it's good, and you know that this is a really well built camera just from gripping it right away, which is great. And the screen is still kind of stiff even after a while or a few years of having this camera, so it's quite nice. And it's really usable. For photography though, I much prefer the flipped screen rather than the fully articulated screen, because this is kind of like, I don't know, it's a waste of time in my opinion if you're doing photography. But it is nice if I'm shooting a video like this and being able to see myself, because I cannot see myself on this camera, so I would actually have to sit here and press the record button and always go to the back of the screen to preview if I'm actually in the frame or not. So yeah, it's really nice if you're shooting video. But for photography, in my opinion, it's, long story short, it's just a little bit time consuming and fiddly. Otherwise, I also like the display up here. I'm glad that they actually kept it on the EOS R, despite not being like top of the line professional or semi-professional camera. But it's really crucial, especially if you're shooting like events. So if you're like shooting weddings, events, things like that, and you have like 2 or 3 cameras on you, and you just don't want to bring your display up like this just to have a look what your settings are and things like that, it's always nice to know that you have your crucial, or to know your crucial settings in here already. So it's just really nice. And this is actually extra useful if you're also working with DSLRs alongside this mirrorless camera, because a lot of times I'm also using my 1DX still, because, you know, like, I cannot really afford the R5 yet, so I'm still using the 1DX for the autofocusing system and also the frame rates and everything, because in action the 1DX still can get more frames done in AI servo than the EOS R, but we'll talk about that later. And another thing on this camera is the weather sealing. Now, I've taken this camera to a lot of countries and also different environments, and this camera seems to survive just fine. And here, as we know, we have the one card slot, which is the SD card. Nothing can be changed about that. I really don't mind having one card slot. The only thing I mind is the SD cards, because I really hate SD cards. They're so not reliable and I lose them all the time. I really love CF cards or CF Express cards, things like that. Though CF card would be more preferable because it is affordable. But anyway, CF or SD, but since they chose SD, then SD is it is. I just had to buy more cards, that's all. But if you're already into SD card system, then I guess it's pretty much fine for you. So the next point is actually the multi-function pad, or the touch bar over here. I don't know what people call them actually, but most people that I watch videos from on YouTube seems to really hate this pad or bar, touch bar, multi-function touch bar, I don't know. For me, I'm one of the very few that really like this button or touch bar. I feel like that they can be more intuitive if they actually design it maybe like 3mm smaller and move it like maybe 2mm up and a bit to the left. because if you have big hands, you can easily hit it really easily. But I really love this idea of having this touch bar. Too bad they got rid of it on the R5. It's just, well, it's just how I use. It's just really quick way to change the type of focusing system, like the different types of focusing points you have on here, whether it's face detection or single point or multi-points or just zone AF, things like that. It's just such a quick way. And yeah, if you have bigger hands or if you're working in like with gloves or something, I just wish that this button would be a little bit smaller, or pad would be a bit smaller. Next would be the EVF. I really love the EVF. The color is almost accurate to the back screen and you're not really having that tunnel vision in here. At least I don't really experience that. It's very nice and responsive, but the only thing I have problem with the viewfinder is the lag. What you're seeing through the viewfinder or the LCD, and I don't know why not a lot of people are actually talking about it, is, for example, if you're taking like weddings or action or just normal moving portrait shooting, it's just really troublesome because sometimes the lag really just, you cannot really predict where your subject might go, and you just like what you're seeing in here is just a few milliseconds later. It doesn't sound as bad as, you know, when I say it, but if you're really shooting and your eyes are just looking into the viewfinder here or just relying on the screen, your focus there is just being distracted by the thought that like, okay, the thing that happened in front or the thing that you're seeing here already happened and it just showed up on your screen. I don't know, you really have to experience it. Like try to do certain action shoots or certain photo shoots or portrait shoots that requires a lot of movement, things like that, and you'll feel how the lag will disturb you. But if you're just shooting like landscape or just simple, really slow pace portrait, or if your subject in photography requires just being very still or very slow, then this will just not bother you at all. But if you're into a little bit of action, then yeah, it will bother you a little bit. The next point is actually just me nitpicking, and not a lot of people really complain about this, is the remote port. I use like the 5D line of cameras, the 1D line of cameras, things like that, and the remote from those line of cameras is different from the EOS R. The EOS R remote uses like the ones you find on like the 70D, 80D, on the lower end Rebel cameras, the 650D, 700D, 800D, things like that. So it's really weird that, you know, for this class of camera to be using the remote control from those cameras. I don't know, this camera doesn't really come with like a proper intervalometer, so a remote is still needed. And even if you don't use intervalometer that much, there are so many other scenarios where remote would just be more practical and convenient than just using like self-timer or certain other functions to compensate in camera, because it's a remote. Like there is a use for it, especially if you're doing macro, if you're in certain event kind of photography, or if you're in certain sport kind of photography where remote is also required, things like that. I still require remote control quite often, even outside using intervalometer. So it's just really a shame that they don't continue using this like the same type of remote. But I also understand that, you know, this camera body is small and compact, so maybe they didn't have room for it. But I think they could really just redesign it a little bit more to accommodate that port. Anyway, into another nitpicking of mine is switching between video and photography mode. A lot of people really love the idea of having completely different settings, different things that the camera would remember for video mode compared to photography mode. I'm neutral about that, but what I really don't like is you have to press like mode and then info to get into the separate video mode. The nice thing about it is that you get true aperture priority video, you get true shutter priority video. It really can be really handy and useful and practical, but I just feel like it's an extra step which is needed, whereas like on the 7D, 6D Mark II, 6D line, 5D line of cameras, well apart from the Mark II and the Mark I, there's just a switch up here just to, you know, switch into the video mode or switch back to the photography mode. And I just wish that it would be that easy or that seamless on this camera, because even with a 5D line of cameras, you still can get like true aperture priority video mode if you just flick to the aperture priority and then just, you know, you just flick one lever and just you're in the video mode. So it's just, maybe it's just me still used to shooting with the system, but to me, I can never get used to this, and it's a bit fiddly, and it's just like 2 or 3 extra seconds longer. Of course, in photography mode, and if you just want to quickly take videos, you can just press the red record button right away, but you have less control over that in the same time. But anyway, now onto a little bit more positive things. I really like the connectivity on this camera, like the wireless connectivity to your mobile devices. I feel like it's much faster than the earlier connectivity that I was used to, and it feels faster than the 5D Mark IV, but don't quote me on that. It's just what I feel, and I cannot really quantify that with the time, because when it comes to like wireless technology, it's sometimes not, especially between camera and phone, sometimes you cannot always time the correct or the same exact timing because it always changes. But to me, it actually feels faster and more responsive, and it just allows me to really control the camera wirelessly, whether I'm just downloading the files or just setting up the camera elsewhere and then controlling the camera, which is really convenient and also really practical, because a lot of times I'm using more than one camera to shoot in an event or in certain personal projects, and this wireless feature is just really nice. And the range is actually pretty good and reliable as well. So if you're into using your camera to like wirelessly shoot, I really recommend this camera because it is a really nice camera to control wirelessly. At least that's my experience anyway. So the next point is actually the autofocusing system. Canon has released several firmware updates since this camera was released, and it really upgraded this camera a lot and really improved this camera to like a whole new level. That being said, it's still not really quick in terms of photography. It can get a lot of work done, and if you're just doing like simple weddings, simple birthday party events, simple sports, simple things like that, like general movement, practically speaking, then this camera will be able to cope with it most of the time. But if you're doing like real action, which of course this camera is not really made for, then it's really getting into, you know, too slow. And something like even the 5D Mark III might be faster at, you know, focusing at those areas. And talking about like continuous autofocusing, this camera frame rates really drops. It really compromises on the frame rates itself if you're doing AI servo, whereas it's not really affecting cameras like my 1DX, my 5D line of cameras, naturally of course. And it's just something I really find a little bit of on downside, because sometimes I really need that burst rate. It doesn't need to be like 8 frames per second, even 5 frames is okay, but oftentimes it's slower than just 5 frames, and I really learned to miss a lot of shots, like a lot of opportunities shooting AI servo with this camera. So if you're doing something like that with this camera, then yeah, I don't really recommend it, especially if you're shooting at like lower than f2 or f2.5 even. The thing is, like, I guess I'm also being a little bit unfair because, you know, I usually shoot AI servo with the 85 1.2. Even my 7200 f2.8, I use that for like landscape, cityscape, architecture, things like that, and not so much for sports. It's strange, but I really love this focal length for sports, but I think that also really depends on people. And it doesn't need to be like real sports, it can just be like fast moving events or fast moving pace of wedding, things like that, that this, you know, lens will have to cope with in terms of AI servo. Of course, this lens is already one of the slowest lenses, one of the slower L lenses to actually ever produced, really, that f1.2. And I did try the RF 85 1.2, and it's actually much better, much more like crisp. The image is cleaner, there's nicer contrast, and overall it's just so much better of a lens than this lens, really. But that lens is also so huge. It's light, but it's huge. It's unnecessarily huge, because when you feel it, you feel like there, I don't know, it's a solid lens, but you still feel like there are empty spaces in the lens. It's just unnecessarily huge, and it's also bloody expensive. So that's why I'm still using the original, well, this is the Mark II of the 85 1.2 EF version with the adapter, because it is still much smaller than the RF version, even with the adapter here. But yeah, back to the focusing part. It's usable for general purposes in photography, just not anything really super active. And it's still one of the reasons why I have to carry like my 1DX or my 5D line of cameras for a bit faster autofocusing system. That being said, I have to give this camera credit because despite shooting slower frame rates, and when it focuses slower, but when it does take picture, most of the time it is in focus. I have more focused pictures with like in focus pictures than with my 1DX or the 5D Mark III, 5D Mark IV, things like that. So yeah, I kind of like with those cameras, the speed is there, but the lens might not be able to cope up, and whether or not it copes up or it already moved away, the camera still takes pictures. So yeah, I guess you still capture certain pictures or more pictures in the same time, but with this camera, when it does take picture, most of the time it is really in focus, and it really gives my EF lenses like a whole new life, because in many scenarios it is able to capture sharper images than my DSLRs. So if I use like the older 35 1.4L or the older 24-70mm L, the EF version, and you know, I sometimes get more sharp or more in focus shots than how I would get from my even the 1DX or the 5D line of cameras. And you know, it really surprised me of how much this camera has changed my mindset or my thoughts on the quality of my L lenses, the EF versions that I have. It's just, yeah, I cannot really explain in words. It's just, it feels so much sharper. It looks so much sharper. And originally, I thought it's just the resolution, but the 5D Mark IV has the same resolution. It's just really how this camera managed to really pull the autofocusing system out of those older lenses into like a new life. And I'm really impressed by this camera. So yes, it's both a negative point, but it is also a positive within the negative point, if that makes sense. But for video, the autofocusing system is nice. It's that dual pixel AF, and it's always known for being like butterly smooth autofocusing system. They're natural, they're accurate, things like that. So it's still the same on this camera. And even though it doesn't have like the fanciest feature that the newer R5 and R6 has in terms of the autofocusing system for video, this camera will still get the job done, and for most of the jobs I'm doing, it's really okay. The one downside about the autofocusing, well, not really autofocusing system, the touchscreen rather, is the lag. The screen actually lags a little bit when you touch on it, so sometimes it can be a little bit annoying. But if you really operate it for a while in one shoot, then the camera or the screen itself catches up with your speed and your pace and kind of like adjusts the speed. So I think it's really kind of a system thing. I'm not sure, but it's just like, for example, if I'm flipping through pictures, like usually there's a lag right away, but if I review my pictures very often and then start flipping through it like already several times, then the speed keeps up until I change the direction of swiping, and then the speed resets to slow again, and then it catches up. So I really don't know what is really going on, whether if it's the software, like if it's the hardware or if it's really the software. I hope that Canon can release a software or firmware that will actually fix that, because it's really annoying a lot of times with the lag. And I think it is fixable in firmware, but I don't know. I don't think they're going to fix it. I just hope they do, but I don't think so, because no one actually ever really addresses that problem but me, I guess. So onto my last nitpicking point. It's actually the intervalometer. It's not really about the fact that the camera bakes the whole picture sequences into a video for you, which is already in itself a downside for me, but that's not really what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about like how it manages power if you're doing something like 2 days worth of interval shooting. So if I were to do like 2 days of interval shootings, which I've done with this camera, I would have to plug in one of those dummy batteries or like a power source into the camera that Canon also produced for like 75 euros, or you can just get a knockoff one for like 25 euros. But like how it manages power is just, it stays on. And for example, if I were to do interval shooting for like a period of 2 days, and maybe like with, I don't know, 2 minutes interval or 1 minute interval or what have you, if I were to do that with like my Fuji cameras, then the camera would shut down right away after the first shot and then turns back on and then shut down. In that way, even one battery, one really tiny battery from Fuji, would last me like 2 days of interval shooting. So I think that Canon can learn from Fujifilm in terms of interval shooting, because yeah, like sometimes you're out there in the forest trying to do like time lapse or set this camera as the B camera, and you don't have the luxury of connecting the camera to the power source or have the power source that lasts that long. It is really life-saving or really, really useful if the power management on the system can actually, you know, be a bit smarter and know when to turn off the power and know when to turn on the power for these sort of things. So yeah, that's just something I personally experience and I wish that Canon would really improve on, but yeah, that's just how I shoot, and I guess majority of people don't shoot that way either, so yeah. But otherwise, I think that this camera overall still feels good. It handles nicely, the grip is nice, it feels solid, everything feels very, very comfortable. It's still a light camera in my opinion, so everything just works. It's really reliable, you're not really compromising anything once you already know the feature and know the functionality of the camera, and it's usually very reliable. It hasn't really crashed on me yet, so that's good. So yeah, now into the image quality and the video quality. So let me first talk about the image quality. The image quality on this camera is great. I love the dynamic range, I love the color reproduction, I love the skin tone, I love that Canon color science you get on this camera. The color reproduction is great, the file is nice. Of course, you're not going to get the best dynamic range in the world, but the dynamic range out of this camera is already more than enough for me, and the skin tone, the rendition of it is nice. The color reproduction on different types of skin tone is brilliant. I really love it on this camera. It's such a nice camera to take, whether you're doing street photography, portrait photography, wedding photography, many photography. Is just, in my subjective opinion, it is a very, very nice color and very, very nice image quality. It doesn't show a lot of moire and aliasing pattern, which is nice. It can cope with many different scenarios, and I don't know, I'm just really, really satisfied. That being said, my favorite Canon color science is actually from the 5D Mark III and from the 1DX. After that, it just gets a little bit weird for me. Of course, this camera, what I mean by weird is just, it's still nice, but it's just not, in my opinion, as pleasing looking as the 5D Mark III and the 1DX, the original 1DX. So, I don't know, it's just a really personal preference thing, because different cameras, even if you're using Canon, Fuji, or what have you, every single generation there will be some sort of tweak in the color science, the color system anyway, but the color will still respond very, very similarly in the editing program, things like that. So yeah, otherwise it's still a really, really nice color science to have a look at. And the detail is really, really nice on this camera. Actually, since the 5D Mark III, I've been trusting the camera with like some of the auto settings, like the auto white balance, and you know, this camera also doesn't really let me down in terms of the auto part, like the auto white balance, or sometimes if I want to use the auto ISO, it's really accurate. It knows which white balance exactly I would be using, or it knows exactly what the right ISO would be. Sometimes it can go a bit too high, but it seems like it also knows its own capability as well. But you know, you can also set your own limit to the auto ISO and everything. So yeah, it's a really, really fun camera to use, but also a camera that is actually really reliable, that you can rely on. If you set certain things to auto and just expect it to work, it will work. So that's also a nice part of this camera. And while we're on the topic of the white balance and lighting, I would like to also add that this camera is really great when it comes to handling with like different or complicated light. The sensor will deliver really nice information detail that you can just recover in post, and I don't know, overall it's just a sensor that, again, it's not really good in one specific area, but it's just an overall a good sensor to actually, you know, have. And the sensor will handle many lighting scenarios, different complicated lighting scenarios really, really nicely. You'll get really nice images out of the sensor that you can work with, or just, you know, post it right away, because even out of the camera, it will retain a lot of detail, and different source of light doesn't look messy. Like with some sensor, even full frame sensors from some of the other Canon cameras or other brand cameras as well, like when it comes to like certain complicated lights, there will be some sort of color shift or weird color appearing in parts of the images. I cannot always describe that right now. It's just, you see it when it's there. Let's say if you're taking pictures in a forest and you have a lot of nice trees, nice tall trees, but it's during like the sunrise morning hour, and that's when you started getting like different weird green from different types of plants and weird green from many other types of trees that, you know, has different green tones, and then there's the really strong yellow to orange kind of golden light coming, and there's a lot of shadow errors as well in some cameras. Some of these colors really get a little bit mixed up, and on this camera it really copes with all those different fine shades of even same color but different shades of it really well, and it's something that I'm really impressed by this camera. So yeah, long story short, the image quality on this camera is really nice. The skin tone is really nice. Yeah, I really can't really say bad thing about it. If you need more dynamic range, then of course there will always be other cameras which can deliver more dynamic range, but to me it's really nice. As I mentioned, the aliasing control is really nice. The other artifacts control is also really nice. And now onto the video quality. The video quality, well, it's nice. It's not the best in the world. I wish it does for full frame 4K, but because this adapter here also accepts EFS lenses, I can just mount like an ultra wide EFS onto this camera and get like really nice budget ultra wide angle shots in 4K. And in 4K you still have that dual pixel AF, so that's pretty good. And some of my YouTube videos were actually recorded with this camera, but because like I haven't really got a lot of chances to shoot like proper commercial shoots with this camera yet, because since I got this camera I've been using my Fuji cameras to actually shoot commercials, or my other Canon cameras like the 5D Mark III, 5D Mark IV, and my 1DX. So I haven't really put this camera through like a real professional, like full-time professional video shoot yet. But out of the camera, the video quality is nice. It's really sharp. The 4K is actually very sharp. It's just a shame that it's crop, in my opinion. I wish that the crop was only like a feature that you can just crop in and shoot crop 4K, and you still have the option to go full 4K with a time limit or something. If they would put that in, that would be great. But you know, if you can mount the EFS lens on here, it's also fine. And with the EFS lenses, if it's from Canon, then the camera will definitely adapt to the viewpoint. So if you switch back to photography mode, it will give you the focal length that the EFS lens would give on a normal crop frame camera. So this camera effectively becomes like an 18 megapixel camera, I guess, if you put an EFS lens on here, so that, you know, you still can use the EFS lens in photography as well. So sometimes I just like to, for fun, experiment with the EFS ultra wide angle lens and put it on here and just shoot like stills and also video with it, so I wouldn't have to change the lens for like switching between 4K video and shooting photos. So yeah, it's just for fun, but you can actually get really nice results with EFS lenses on this camera as well, so it's really nice. But in terms of video quality, it also doesn't really show a lot of moire aliasing. I wish that the video quality would actually show more dynamic range though. As much as stills, I would like it to be that way, but it does have the original Canon log in here, which is nice. You can actually recover a lot of detail with the Canon log on this camera, although in my opinion, when you use log, the skin tone gets a little bit weird in my opinion. Maybe it's just me who's just like not used to using the original Canon log, but yeah, it's not really fun to edit Canon log for the skin tone, in my opinion. But if you're not using log, then I think the skin tone, everything just looks really nice. The color reproduction of the camera is great. And if you're not the type of person to edit images or edit videos anyway, then straight out of the camera, the video and the image quality is really nice. So I wish that on the video side of things that this camera would at least do 1080p 120 or 100 frames per second. It would be so much lifesaver if it would do that, because right now I'm using my Fuji cameras to shoot slow motions, and you know, with the Fuji system I would not really talk about them in a bad way for video because they're quite sharp, apart from the autofocusing system and sometimes skin tone, but otherwise it's a very sharp image and everything. But I just wish that this camera would also have it. It would be so much better to just carry like one camera system to a shooting and that's it. Because right now I'm having to carry my Pentax, my Fuji, my Canon, sometimes my Sony, sometimes my Nikon. It's really a hustle. I just wish it's more improved. But anyway, that's just pretty much how I shoot. I know that a lot of people will shoot differently, and depending on the scenarios or the environment or whatever they have to face and the kind of things they have to shoot, they will shoot it differently to their own aesthetics, their own design and everything. And yeah, they will have different requirements. But to me, those were the downsides and the positive things as well. And without making this video too long, to the conclusion, I think that, you know, this camera is still a very, very capable camera. I'm still standing by on that. For the price of between 1,300 and 1,800, it's a huge price gap. Like, usually full retail, it's around 1,800, but there are usually promotions for like 1,600, 1,500. I got mine for 1,300. It was purely because of the shop's mistake for advertising that. They had it on like one whole week, just making that mistake, 1,300. So yeah, I got it by luck for 1,300. They didn't really do any recall. It's just like, it was there, and it was actually supposed to be like a 1 month period of promotion. But then like after 1 week, they realized that, wait a minute, it wasn't supposed to cost 1,300. So they put it back to the original promotion that they actually wanted to do it, which it was like 1,500 or 1,600. So yeah, but anyway, that was just a little story for me. And anyway, like, but secondhand, you still can get 1,300. I've seen really nice secondhand with battery grips as well, going for 1,300 with low shutter life as well. So you can really get this camera for like a bargain nowadays, in my opinion. Yes, there's the RP, but the RP doesn't do as much as this camera. It is lighter. I really would love to have the RP if it takes the LPE6N batteries, but it doesn't. To me, it's a huge deal killer because all of my other 5Ds and this camera and also my 6Ds, they use LPE6 and LPE6 line of batteries in general, and also 70D, 80D and so on. But, you know, having one camera from Canon that, well, apart from my 1DX, that uses different battery is also kind of like a deal killer. But anyway, this camera is still a nice camera. It does everything nicely for the price. It's full frame for the resolution. The video quality is still nice. It is a very easy to use camera. It is very efficient and fast to operate. You're not going to be really fuzzing a lot with the menu system or how it operates. The menu on the touchscreen is great, like the quick menu on the touchscreen as well. And it's just an overall a really, really intuitive camera to use as well. And it can be really, really important if you're out there in the field trying to actually get the moment, but also you're operating with different cameras as well. And having a really nice, efficient camera to use when you are under like pressure shooting and operating with other cameras as well and other gear, you know, it can be a lifesaver, and you can have more pleasure just shooting with it. Or if you're just shooting this for your like personal work or just like casually shooting, this camera is also a really nice and fun camera to shoot. It just, personally, the way it handles, the way it operates, the detail of it, it just makes me want to actually go out with this camera as well and just capture really nice images. It's just a fun camera to use, and it's weather sealed, it's tough. I dropped it before. It's well built actually, like there are practically no scratches on it yet, but only time will prove if I can scratch up this thing. Really, it's a really nice camera. And knowing that it's a tough camera as well, it just makes you want to actually go out and shoot more. At least that's what it does to me. Like, I really want to go out or wake up early just to go out and shoot more, shoot different things. Yeah, it's just an overall nice camera to use. I know that this video might sound like very biased about like all the good things about this camera with some bad things, but in my opinion, it's a very good camera, and for what I use it for, I wouldn't really ask for that much more. And it's a very reliable camera. It's just, I don't know, it's just how I use this camera, I think, and also the result that it delivers, it's just really satisfying to me. So yeah, I think that you have to pick up this camera for yourself and see, you know, you can borrow it or just pick it up in the store, things like that, and see if you like the way it operates, the way it handles, like the basic color science out of it, and if you like the files, things like that. You know, to me the files is really nice. You can really grade it. It's really robust. The bit rate is nice. yeah, it's a nice overall camera to use, and I would take it to really any event that I'm paid to, or any projects that I'm actually shooting, things like that. It just hasn't really let me down yet. The only other downside is prepare to buy a lot of batteries, because especially if you're shooting like both video and photos, it will shoot through the batteries like crazy. So just prepare for that. Otherwise, I don't have a lot more to say. Oh, one last thing. This flip screen here. I wish that, you know, it's completely flat, like this. Just a couple of degrees. Because sometimes it can be a little bit misleading. So yeah, depending on how you shoot, like if you're really shooting like a bird's eye view perspective, sometimes it can be a bit misleading if you're really balanced or not, because it's only a few degrees off. I just wish it's like perfectly flat. But while we're on this topic, I remember 2 weeks ago I found another use for this articulating screen is when I was shooting a model, and like I wanted to direct her in like a way she would get, but like we were in an environment where I couldn't really describe how I want it to look like, so I just had to flip the screen like this, and she was on the floor or on the windowsill, and then like I just tell her like the mood that she should be in and things like that, and then she could just look into the screen and then adjust herself, and it was just really practical. It just saves a lot of verbal time. If I just like flip, she sees herself and she knows what I want, and she just pose. So it was really nice to do that, or have this feature. But anyway, if you need a free photography guidebook, it's linked down in the description below, together with my free 2021 photography calendar. It's all digital download. You don't need to send me your email address. You don't need to subscribe to anything. Just click and download. So yeah, that's where I'll leave it. Thank you very much for watching. Have fun shooting, stay safe, and bye for now.